Find mentors who handle pressure. Believe in your ability to work through the complexity. Get help when you need it. Organize the problems to create solutions. And be passionate about finding the puzzles and how the puzzles fit together to move forward. Because never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has. And it's still possible, even in today's chaotic environment, to plan for the future, to think about what you need to do differently. And I challenge you to use these concepts and the tools that I talked about today to think about how to adjust your planning process, continue to be sustainable in the future. You'll develop a program that you go seek funding for, not the other way around. And that's the way it ought to be. And you can ensure that you stay away from mission creep by being very clear about who you are and what your competencies are. And that's often very hard. It's very hard for agencies sometimes to figure out what the essence of their mission really is, because they do stuff. And some agencies have trouble with the clarity of that because they may already be off the mission track. So, really thinking about, who are you and what's the real cause? That language, not just mission, but the cause. What are we trying to really make a difference on in the community? And really focus around planning around those things and not just doing stuff to chase money is the way to do that. It really takes a lot of clarity and intentionality, but it can be done. And that's a short answer, but there's really a process that I'd be happy to talk with you offline about how to do that. So I'd be happy to talk to you about that, but there's a process to go through to make sure that that is how you think. Other questions? I'll give you an example. I have a client in Blair County, it's Family Services, who envisioned 3 years ago that they wanted to put together a family advocacy center and they needed to build a new emergency shelter. It takes a couple years to really figure out how to organize that, get a capital campaign going, and put that into place. And I'll use a local example that is actually happening as we speak, the Achievement Center. The Achievement Center is in the middle of a capital campaign right now. That board, and I'm on that board, we've been planning that now for 5 years. So a plan itself, but we are two planned generations away from where we were when that thought was first envisioned. And the agency has changed and evolved quite a bit since then. So the planning horizon is really 18 months to 3 years, maybe, okay? And most action plans are really 12 to 18 months. So while you should still have a grand vision for long-term sustainability, especially if you have capital campaigns on the horizon, because capital campaign planning is a 3-year deal. So you need 3 years to identify and execute a capital campaign, and you need a couple years before that to really do the planning to make it possible to even build a case for support, especially in Erie, for a capital campaign. But you've got to be able to have that flexibility where you're taking care of business in the short run while you're planning over that longer horizon. So, and most plans have to be the 12 to 18 month, what are we orchestrating to get the outcome for what we need, keeping that longer term, 3 to 5 year or maybe even 10-year plan in mind. Well, the ingredients of that person, if they have finance sense, that's really helpful. Or if they have business sense, or if they've been involved, the best ones I've seen of that are operations people who have built programs from the ground up before, okay? And again, I'll go back to the Achievement Center, because the Achievement Center, I had this conversation with Rebecca Brummagem probably 8 years ago about putting somebody in the role of program development fast tracker, and they made a role for Joan Kramzer, who was then the associate executive director. She had been the director of early intervention. She had grown a number of programs, and she became the keeper of the list of 27 different program development priorities. okay? And she was the person that worked on coordinating the feasibility study work, working with finance, looking at the funding streams. She was the project manager, okay? And now Lauren and Holly are doing that kind of stuff at Achievement Center, right? Okay? So there's they've got a new brand of it going on at the Achievement Center, but Joan did it herself for a long time. But she understood funding streams, she had run programs, and she had built a couple from the ground up. So she understood the entrepreneurial development process. And the ability to keep things moving simultaneously. So you've got to have a good multitasker, and you've got to have somebody who can work with a variety of different people in the agency, because it usually takes a village to get a new program off the ground. And cat herding is, another skill that type of individual might need to have, depending on if you're coordinating with internal or external stakeholders. And sometimes it's one person, and in other times it's a function that works together, where program directors, work together. But usually I encourage my clients, if they're big enough to have staff capacity for, what the equivalent is of a planning coordinator or a director of planning. Most agencies need that role. And it really is a person who is not just a grant writer, but they need to know how to write grants. They need to know but they really need to know how to build the program, because if you don't have the program built, you can't write a grant to really fund it either. You got to have the elements of the program built. So they got to be able to do both. Or piece together the various individuals who have those different skill sets into a team, and the team becomes the place where we fast track what we're doing. You just got to designate somebody as the coordinator of the team, which is, where the buck stops and who dogs after everybody else to make sure that we get something done. Because we're doing this all in our spare time, over and above our day jobs, okay? And I always say, we were in trouble when we're asking our managers to do their strategic plan activities between 2 and 4 a.m. Because if that's the case, we don't have the capacity in the agency to do what we need to do. Somebody's got to go raise more money. I have a board right now that the price of admission of their strategic plan is 3 of their board members raising $100,000, okay? And they have 3 board members. They have 3 board members who can go find that money, okay? They do. And the 3 board members know who they are now. And I'm working them through their, you really want me to do what? Phase. Like Misty talked about. You really want me to do what? Yeah, this is the price of admission. And then all of these other things will follow. It's hard to be half pregnant, okay? And agencies need to look at how close is what you're doing to an evidence-based model, and how standardized are our programs today, okay? Because you could probably get away with, at least in the short run, continuing to standardize what you're doing and evaluating your own outcome, as long as you can make the case that you're close. You don't have to go buy an evidence-based program, for example. But you should be looking at what are the best practices out there, what are the benchmarks, and how close are what we're doing to those models. Because you need to prove that your programs do something. If you're actually using or very close to an evidence-based approach or a best practice, you should be talking about that. So that, I think, is the first step. Look at how close you are to what might be out there. And then if there's nothing out there, then think about, okay, how standardized are we? Do we get our outcomes? And can we prove that to somebody? Those are the questions that you have to ask yourself. But I'd be happy to have an offline conversation with you about the nuances of that, because it's pretty complicated. But that's the short answer. That's a very good question. The best objectivity is found by, I would say, the more external information that you bring and the more stakeholder input you bring, the more validity your internal ideas have. Okay? Which is the difference between we could all be on the same page, but it might be the wrong page. If you have done a community needs assessment and you have survey data that shows these are the top priorities, you got external data. If you've done client focus groups and interviews, and the top 3 things that clients are telling you that they want and need are the top 3 things on your to-do list, you've got some validity, okay? You have external evidence that what you're suggesting is the right thing to do. And in my mind, you need that voice of the external customer, you need the voice of the industry into the process for that very reason. Thank you very much. And I hoped it was useful on some level.